This week on Wealth Track, how to retire with Morningstar's personal finance guru, Christine Benz. It's the title of her new book, and this week's interview is about the non-financial aspects of retirement. Christine Benz is next on Consuelo Mack Wealth Track.
Funding provided by ClearBridge Investments, the Fairholme Foundation, First Eagle Investments, Bill Miller, Baird, Strategas Asset Management, Research Affiliates, Royce Investment Partners, Seafarer Capital Partners, and Women Investing in Security and Education.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Wealth Track. I'm Consuelo Mack. Since Wealth Track's launch in 2005, we have spent a fair amount of time on retirement planning, mostly on the financial side of it. What we haven't covered nearly as much are the non-financial aspects of retirement, visualizing what it will be like, lifestyle decisions, relationships, spending, where to live, what to do. A recent headline in USA Today, "What do working Americans fear more than death? Retirement," really brought all of those issues to the fore. According to USA Today, a recent survey found that 64% of the respondents said retirement is more frightening than divorce. 61% said it was more frightening than death. 54% than getting fired, and 53% said it was scarier than poor health. Well, what is so scary about retirement? It turns out it is a mixture of financial and lifestyle worries. Leading concerns are the rising cost of long-term care, poor investment decisions, losing funds, feeling disconnected from society, adapting new routine of lifestyle, and maintaining desired standard of living. Well, we're going to address all of those issues with one of our and our audience's favorite guests and an expert on financial and retirement planning. In the first of a two-part interview, we are going to sit down with Christine Benz, Morningstar's longtime director of personal finance and retirement planning, where she is known for her prodigious high-quality output, including writing daily personal finance columns, co-hosting the Longview podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with investment and personal finance thought leaders, and author of several books, including her just-published How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. We want to cover as many of those lessons as possible with Christine, which is why we have asked her to do two shows with us. This week, we are going to focus on those oft-neglected non-financial aspects of retirement. And in part two, we will review the key financial lessons. I began the conversation by asking her about the book, How to Retire. Why was it so important for her to write?
Well, a couple of reasons, Consuelo. One is that I had been toiling in this retirement decumulation space for a while and have realized just how devilishly difficult it is to figure out how to extract cash flows from a portfolio. So I wanted to talk about that. But then along the way, I have met individuals who focus more on other aspects of retirement, not necessarily just the portfolio and Social Security claiming. So I wanted to bring their voices out. So that was the major impetus, helping illuminate what I think is often a really difficult life phase for a lot of people.
One of the most interesting aspects to me of How to Retire was the fact that, you and I have always talked about the financial aspects of personal finance and retirement planning, and you devote quite a bit of the book on the non-financial aspects. How did that happen?
I had met some great people along the way whose work somehow touches financial matters, but mostly relates to other sort of lifestyle considerations. And it does seem to me that many of the experts who focus on the financial piece of retirement planning think a lot about the non-financial aspects of how to do these things. So even the decisions about how to construct a portfolio depends on how you're wired as an individual. So there's a lot of interrelationships between the financial and non-financial. That's why I thought it was important to bring both pieces to bear in this book.
One of the most intriguing places that you started, and it was the first chapter, and it was with Michael Fink, and it's visualizing yourself in retirement and visualize your in-retirement lifestyle. So talk to us about that.
I thought it was great to have Michael as the first chapter because I think oftentimes, and Michael talked about this in the book, people come into retirement quite burned out from their jobs, and so they have a long list of things that they want to do to relax, whether golfing or taking trips or whatever the case might be. And his point is you need to relax from something, that you will truly enjoy that relaxation that much more, even in retirement, if you have kind of a counterpoint to it. So his point is that you do want to come into retirement with a sense of what will be your purpose besides those relaxation activities. What will you relax from? And so his thought is that you should think about the things that you want to accomplish in this 25 or 30 year period. It might be mundane things like finally really cleaning out the garage or getting your paperwork organized, or you might have more big purpose P activities that you want to pursue. But he thinks that it's important to be truly thoughtful about what you want to accomplish and make sure that you are putting in place healthy habits to support those things. So he talks about the importance of looking at your calendar, trying to figure out how you will fill your days, thinking about making sure that you're taking care of your health, making sure that you're taking care of your relationships. Both of those things we know are super important to thriving throughout our lives, and that continues later in life.
Speaking of being burned out, a lot of us, I mean, are adrenaline freaks. We love what we're doing. I'm in that camp. You are too. I hope I'm not going to be totally burned out when I retire. So talk to us about the transitioning, why we might want to consider trying to do that, transitioning into retirement instead of going cold turkey.
Yeah, I love this idea of phased retirement. And of course, it tends to be more accessible to better educated, higher income knowledge workers who have oftentimes a little more flexibility in their workplaces. But I do love the idea of transitioning gradually if you can. And this is particularly important for people who had positions that are viewed as more prestigious in our society, where you're talking about doctors and lawyers, people who have very much perceived their own identities as part and parcel of whatever their careers were, and it can be very difficult to step away from those positions. So I love the idea of finding a way, if you can, to potentially phase into retirement where perhaps you can keep the kernels of the things that you still really enjoy about your job and bring those into retirement, where maybe you're trial running, you're working with your employer on transitioning into retirement gradually. And then also any other lifestyle considerations that you're contemplating as you transition into retirement. So if you're thinking of relocation, for example, by all means trial run that before you uproot yourself and move to a completely different location. And then I also love Jamie Hopkins' point in the book about trial running spending, because that's another really difficult transition for people, especially people who have been assiduous savers throughout their working lives. It can really be difficult to transition into spending from that portfolio. And I think I'm going to be one of those people, Consuelo, who will find it really difficult to actually start spending from my portfolio. So Jamie's point was, experiment with that. Buy a car with cash, for example, if you're able to do that. And all of the research about spending very much points to the value of spending on experiences, if you can. And then also when we look at the trajectory of retiree spending, we very much see that those early years of retirement do tend to be the higher spending years of retirement for exactly that reason, that there's often that pent-up demand, maybe family activities, maybe you're helping adult children get launched, and that's just fine, because what we see even in higher income households is a tendency for spending to trend down throughout the retirement life cycles.
Another chapter is about nurturing your relationships, and the study that I referenced that was published in USA Today about people fearing retirement more than death. I mean, one of the reasons was that they were afraid of social isolation, because so many of us have such good relationships with our colleagues and the people that we interact with through our professional lives, that it can be, quite isolating once you go into retirement. So talk about the nurturing relationships aspect of retirement.
I love that chapter with Laura Carstensen. She's the Stanford researcher, and she has done a lot of research on relationships and happiness and success later in life. And she's come to a couple of different conclusions. One, her work and that of others very much corroborates relationships are everything in terms of our sense of happiness and well-being, that connections to other human beings is important throughout our life cycles, and that certainly continues later in life. Many of us do have key relationships through our workplaces, and some of those relationships may continue, some may not. Her work indicates that men oftentimes have many of their relationships through their workplaces. When they step away from work, it can be a real sense of loss for them. So the point is to start early, prior to retirement, making sure that you are backfilling perhaps if a lot of your relationships are coming through work, making sure that you are putting yourself in a position to get out there and meet people. She also notes that our social networks do tend to winnow down a little bit as we age naturally, and some of this is for sad reasons, that we might have people pass away or move away from us. But she points out that actually some of it is self-selected, that we're actually becoming a little bit more selective about our social networks, and that's a-okay, that we're actually choosing to spend time with people where when you walk away from that meeting, you're kind of walking on air. Those are the kind of relationships that we're choosing to spend more time and energy on, and we're casting off maybe some of the peripheral relationships. The example she gives would be the children's friends' parents who may have been part of your social network when you were launching them. Maybe they'll stay great friends, but people like that may not stay within the inner network. And then finally, a key point is that it's important to diversify that social network, especially across the age bands, because inevitably you will have things change in your social network. So put yourself in a position where you're coming into contact with younger people. Maybe it's if you are living in a community where you have the opportunity to volunteer with people of different age levels, or maybe you're working part-time, but that's super helpful for all of us to just make sure that we're staying in contact, we're making friends with people at different age levels.
My grandmother was really good at that in her neighborhood.
I love it.
I remember that well into her 90s. And aging itself, talk about the aging process and how some of the techniques that we can use to adapt to the aging process.
Right. I loved that several of the people I interviewed for the book talked about this, that it's important to not just think your 65-year-old self or whatever your age is when you retire, that it will ever be thus. That it's helpful to anticipate what ways you might change, think about other older adults who you've interacted with as they've aged, take positive cues from the good situations, and also bear in mind some of the things that haven't gone as well with older adults in your life. But to think about retirement as a series of phases, I think, is a very good model where perhaps you are thinking about kind of the go-go, slow-go, no-go phase, because when people have examined this, they very much do see retirement as a series of phases for many of us. For some people, they do stay healthy and active and really throughout their whole lives, but for others of us, there are some transitions that can happen along the way. And the point is, if you can anticipate them, you can be in the driver's seat with some of the decision making that needs to go on. And someone I interviewed in the book said that you don't want to put your kids in the position of making these difficult decisions for you. If some decisions need to be made about your housing, for example, you don't necessarily want your kids to be deciding where you end up. Think forward, think about what sort of living situation you would value, social interactions you want to have, and so on. And do that preemptively.
One of the things that you address in How to Retire is that aging in place, which a lot of people want to stay in their own home. They don't want to leave, but it's not that easy, and it can be difficult.
Right. I loved Mark Miller's point on this, is that people tend to think of aging in place as in a quite narrow sense, that they tend to think, well, it's exactly in the home that I'm living in. And Mark's point was, well, no, step back and think about your place is really your community, your proximity to social interactions, family, healthcare practitioners, cultural activities you might like to do, and that may necessitate some relocation. But aging in place, I think people oftentimes do tend to think narrowly about their homes, and instead it's helpful to think holistically about whether a home truly makes sense for you in terms of its setup, in terms of its functionality for aging. It's helpful to take a step back and not think narrowly about that home. I often talk about my family's situation, which is that my parents did age in place with caregivers, and that was what they wanted, and it was still a heavy lift for family around them just to make sure that those caregivers were hired, that they were there in their places. And of course, caregivers can have complicated lives, to make sure that the groceries got bought and the house repairs got made and all of that stuff. So I always say to people who truly want to stay in their homes, just make sure that you have some super committed, either adult child or another loved one who's nearby to help see that through, because it can be more complicated than just, setting your bathroom up to have a walk-in shower. It really requires that you have a lot of help around the margins, even if your plan is to hire caregivers.
And you do write about the fact that your personal experience with your parents, and that basically you did take over finances and the in-home care and all of the aspects of their later years. And so that is something that, as you said, when we're still in control of our lives, to make some decisions. Do you want to leave it to someone else, or do you want to do it yourself? So that would go into part of the planning and the transitioning into the later years of retirement.
Exactly. One thing I wrote about in the book, Consuelo, was running into two older adults. It was at a funeral lunch for a friend's dad, and I'm sitting next to these people and just having the greatest conversation with them. They looked so young and well and seemed so vibrant. And so I was talking to my friend later. It was her aunt and uncle, and she said that they were both in their 90s at the time I met them. They looked 20 years younger. But I think one of their secrets was that they said they did not want to burden their kids with worrying about them, and they loved to travel. So they had preemptively moved into an independent living facility where they were just able to shut their door when they took these trips. I think part of that just freed them up, and certainly freed their families up to allow them to pursue a really great retirement. So there are definitely examples around us of people who look way younger than they are and are living really youthful, happy lives, in part because they have taken some of these preemptive steps.
Healthcare, huge fear is long-term care. All the research shows that. So, how do we plan for taking care of ourselves, long-term care concerns as we age?
This is one of the most difficult problems in retirement planning. Unfortunately, there are few good answers, and it's really kind of just a coin flip as to whether we will require paid long-term care. It's roughly 50-50 when you look at the data. So it's a real worry for a lot of retirees. There are really three key ways. One would be to self-fund long-term care, and certainly when I talk to a lot of higher income seniors, that's the plan, where they are planning to cover long-term care expenses out of pocket. The other option would be to have some sort of an insurance product in the mix, whether a pure long-term care insurance policy, and of course that's been a very troubled market where people have had a lot of premium increases. You hear these horror stories about people having difficulty with claims as well. Increasingly in that insurance space, we're seeing some of these hybrid policies come on strong, along, which is typically a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider bolted onto it. There's a nice sort of optionality to that where you know that even if you don't need long-term care, and I hope you won't need long-term care, you'll still have a death benefit at the end of your life. So these policies have gotten a lot more popular. So that's in the insurance realm. And then the last realm, and this is particularly important for people with tighter finances, would be to rely on government resources. And Medicaid is the largest provider of long-term care in the U.S. Most people cannot purchase insurance or self-fund long-term care. So 3 not great avenues, I would say. But for the self-funders, I always say, just make sure that you are segregating that fund from your spendable assets. And I think that'll give you less angst when it comes to actually spending from your portfolio on your own needs, apart from any long-term care needs. If you have that sort of bucket segregated from the rest of your portfolio, to me that provides a certain level of peace of mind. And then best case scenario, if you don't need that fund, then it's something that your kids can inherit from you.
Christine, one investment for a long-term diversified portfolio, is there one investment we should make for our long-term well-being in retirement from a non-financial point of view?
So it's financial / non-financial. I would say invest in another set of eyes in your plan. So I love DIY, do-it-yourself type investors, people who are doing their retirement savings on their own. I think that's A-okay, and it's not that complicated, especially if you don't overcomplicate it. But when retirement comes along, I do think it's very valuable to get another set of eyes on your plan, ideally someone who's objective and who is fee only and is a fiduciary. So a website I would recommend is napfa.org, which is a group of fee only financial planners. They're all fiduciaries. They're nearly all CFPs, certified financial planners. And many of them will work with you on an hourly or a per engagement basis. So it's not like you're signing on for ongoing services. You can pay them a fixed sum. You'll usually have to write a check. But I think that's just a great way to buy yourself some peace of mind. Make sure that you're not neglecting any blind spot in your plan.
That's a great idea. And final question, Christine, having written How to Retire and thinking about the non-financial aspects of retirement, what's a key takeaway for you?
I learned so much during the course of this book, but one of the key things, I guess, when I think about my own retirement is this idea of phasing into retirement is very much my personal plan, that there are things I love about my job like this and things I don't love as much, so I'm trying to kind of stealth shed some of the things I don't love as much, the responsibilities I don't love as much, but I do expect that I will continue doing some aspects of my job for the foreseeable future. I talked to Scott Burns, who's a retirement columnist, separate from the book, but he made the point to me that he had tried to retire, and he said he was stocking shelves in the food pantry, and he said, I realized, even though I enjoyed that work and I enjoyed my interactions with people there, he said, I realized this probably wasn't the highest, best use for my skills in this world. So he is in his 80s now, continuing to write columns about financial and retirement planning. I love that. And so I plan to do something along those lines where I continue to do education and find that it's just something that gives me a sense of purpose and puts me in contact with other human beings. I plan to do that, and that was a key takeaway for me from this book.
Right. And Christine Benz, may your transition be very, very long.
Well, thank you.
We can continue to benefit from your wisdom and your advice. So Christine Benz, thanks so much for joining us on Wealth Track for part 1 of our interview on how to retire. And our next interview is going to be about the financial aspects, more familiar territory for you and me for the interview. But thanks, Christine, for joining us. I really appreciate it. And talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Consuelo.
At the close of every Wealth Track, we try to give you one suggestion to help you build and protect your wealth over the long term. Not surprisingly, this week's action point is read Christine Benz's book, How to Retire. 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. As we just discussed, retirement is much more than financial planning. In How to Retire, Benz covers all aspects of retirement with top experts in each area, including herself, in 20 succinct and informative chapters. The non-financial considerations which we just touched upon include visualizing retirement, where to live, how to spend your time, nurturing relationships, and aging. The financial ones are also covered, such as investment planning, asset allocation, retirement income, spending, and estate planning. Benz is a financial and retirement planning guru in her own right, but in How to Retire, she has assembled a team of her go-to experts to share their lessons in easy-to-read and actionable chapters. In one volume, you now have a comprehensive and accessible How to Retire guide from Benz and her hand-picked pros. For those of you on social media, feel free to follow us on Facebook, X, and our YouTube channel. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a refreshing weekend and make the week ahead a healthy, profitable, and productive one.